The Felrath had not eaten in 9 days when Essa Vane first walked into the holding bay, and it watched her the way a thing watches when it has already decided it does not care what happens next. It was enormous. The manifest said 460 kilograms, but the manifest had been written by someone who had never been in the same room with the animal. In the cage, it filled the space the way a river fills a channel not crammed, just occupying exactly what was there. 6 limbs, the rear 2 heavier than the front 4, all of them folded beneath a body covered in banded fur the color of oxidized copper. The skull was broad and flat, the ears folded back not in aggression, but in the particular stillness of a creature that had run out of reactions to have. 3 toes on each forepaw, each one ending in a retracted claw that, extended, would be roughly the length of Essa's forearm. She had been hired as cargo clearance. The transport Durath's Folly had 22 holds, and 3 of them needed inspection logs filed before they reached Keth Station. The holding bay was hold 6. No one had told her what hold 6 contained. She stopped in the doorway. The Felrath looked at her. Its eyes were a pale, washed-out gold, the color of light through old glass, and they held her face the way a compass needle holds north, not because it wanted to, but because that was what it did. Essa said nothing. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, then walked to the far wall, pulled up the inspection panel, and began working through the checklist on her tablet. She did not look at the animal again, but she was aware of it the entire time, the way you are aware of a fire in a room even when your back is turned to it. When she left, the Felrath had not moved, but its ears had come up just slightly. That was day 1. Day 2, Essa checked hold 6 from the doorway and did not enter. The Felrath was lying on its side, its breathing even and slow, but one of those pale gold eyes had cracked open the moment she appeared in the frame. She stood there for 30 seconds, made a note on her tablet that the ventilation flow was within tolerance, and left. She went back to the crew mess and sat with her meal, and tried to remember the last time a caged animal had made her feel like the one being assessed. Day 3, she came back with the inspection kit and a second protein ration from the crew galley. The Felrath's ration tray sat untouched in the floor slot, the synthetic block already beginning to dry and crack at the edges. Essa did not approach the cage. She set the extra ration on the inspection panel and went back to her checklist. She had no particular reason she could explain for bringing it. She heard the tray move. She did not look. When she left, the tray was empty. Day 4, she started humming. It was not something she planned. She had been reviewing sensor calibration logs for 2 hours and her mind had drifted, and she hummed a measure of something old from the agricultural district on Karath where she had grown up, a planting song, nothing significant. She stopped when she realized she was doing it. The Felrath had moved. It was at the forward edge of the cage, sitting up, its broad head tilted 6 degrees to the right. It was looking at her, the way it had not looked at anything since the manifest date. She finished the measure, then the next one. The Felrath sat and listened with the absolute stillness of a creature using every faculty it possessed to do exactly that. Not restless, not circling, just still. Its ears were forward and its eyes tracked her face, not the door, not the ceiling vents, not the sounds the ship made around them. Her face. She finished the song and the bay was quiet for a moment, and then she started again from the beginning, because she did not know what else to do. Day 5 was when the guard came. His name was Felrath, and he worked the holding bay security rotation, and he did not like the Felrath. He had said so several times in the crew mess, in the particular way men talk about things they are afraid of when they want it to sound like professional judgment. When Essa arrived for her inspection log, Felrath was already there, standing outside the cage with a shock prod extended at arm's length, tapping it against the bars. The Felrath was backed against the far wall, pressed flat, every muscle across its back and shoulders knotted hard under the fur. Its ears were down. Its eyes tracked the prod the way an eye tracks a light it cannot look away from. "What are you doing?" Essa said, not a question. Felrath turned around. "It moved toward the bars when I walked past. It does that." "Put the prod away." "I am contracted security." "You are contracted to prevent the cargo from escaping. It is not escaping." She walked to the cage and stood between Felrath and the bars and looked at him with the flat expression of someone who has spent 6 years in cargo transit and has run out of patience for most things. "Put it away, or I file an incident report on the cargo condition." "Your call." Felrath put the prod away and left. Essa stood with her back to the cage for a moment. Then she turned. The Felrath had not moved from the far wall, but it was watching her, not the door Felrath had gone through. Her. She had expected it to be watching Felrath. Predators tracked threats. That was what she understood of predators. But Felrath had left the room and the Felrath's gaze had not followed him out. It had stayed on her, with that same compass needle quality, fixed and deliberate, and she did not know what to do with that, so she did what she always did with things she did not know how to handle. She put it aside and went back to work. She sat down on the inspection crate, pulled out her tablet, opened the old planting song she had found in the ship's cultural archive, the full notation. She hummed it from the beginning. By the time she was 3 measures in, the Felrath was at the front of the cage again, lying down, its enormous head resting on its forepaws 6 centimeters from the bars. It did not close its eyes, but the muscles across its back had gone soft. Day 6, the transport received confirmation. The buyer's collection team would meet them at berth 14 of Keth Station. The Felrath was scheduled for transfer within 2 hours of docking. The manifest noted its destination as a private entertainment facility in the Outer Ledge districts. The facility's operating license had been suspended twice and reinstated both times on appeal. Essa read the confirmation on the crew access board outside the galley. She read it twice. Then she went back to her quarters and sat on her bunk for a long time. She did not go to the holding bay that night. But at 300, when the ship was running quiet, she walked down there anyway, and she sat outside the cage in the dark without turning on the work lights, and she did not hum anything, and neither of them made a sound. The Felrath lay at the front of the cage, with its head on its paws. She could hear it breathe. She thought about the facility on the outer ledge. She thought about the suspended license and what a license gets suspended for. She thought about 9 days without eating and what that reveals about an animal's judgment of its own circumstances. She thought about the Wildlife Conservation Office in Keth Station's Port District, and whether 40 credits and 1 bag could do anything useful with the kind of trouble she was thinking about. The Felrath breathed in, the Felrath breathed out. She stayed until the ship's lights shifted to morning cycle amber. Then she went back to her quarters and wrote the behavioral specialist's name on the inside of her wrist in ink, not stylus, in case the tablet died. Day 7 was docking day. Essa was on the cargo deck when the collection team came aboard, 4 of them, contracted handlers in impact-rated gear, carrying portable containment equipment that looked expensive and had clearly been designed by someone who had never met a Felrath. Their lead, a wide man named Felrath, who wore his organization's badge on his shoulder like a warrant, went straight to the holding bay without speaking to the ship's crew. Essa followed. She did not know why. She told herself she was filing the final inspection log. Felrath's team set up the transfer rig outside the cage, a neck harness on a long pole, shock deterrent emitters along the walls, a portable wheeled crate that was nominally large enough for the animal and in practice about 2/3 of what it needed. Felrath had the release code for the cage on a handheld. He was not looking at the Felrath. He was looking at his equipment checklist. The cage lock clicked open. The door swung inward. The Felrath stood. It was the first time Essa had seen it at full height. The rear limbs brought its shoulder mass to a level slightly above her own head. 6 limbs moved with the particular coordinated silence of something that had spent its entire evolutionary history not being noticed until it chose to be. It filled the doorway. Felrath's team took one collective step back without discussing it first. Felrath himself did not move. He held up the neck harness. "Come on," he said. "Walk easy." The Felrath walked out of the cage. It walked to Essa. It sat down at her feet. The sound of 600 kilograms settling onto deck plating is not subtle, and the bay went quiet in the way bays go quiet when everyone present has just recalculated something important. Felrath stared. His team held very still. Essa looked down at the animal at her feet, the broad, flat skull level with her hip, the pale gold eyes looking up at her, the copper-banded fur moving slowly with each exhale. "Easy," she said, the way she said it when she hummed low without pressure. The Felrath's ears came up. "What is this?" Felrath said. His voice had a thin quality it had not had before. "It seems like it has made a choice," Essa said. "I am just standing here. That is my cargo. That animal is contracted to my employer." "I know." She did not move. The Felrath did not move. "I think you will need to explain that to it." Felrath stepped forward with the neck harness. The Felrath's head turned. The turn was slow and deliberate, a mechanism engaging, and what came out of its chest was not a snarl. A snarl is noise and excitement. This was something lower, a frequency that lived in the floor plating and in Essa's sternum and apparently in the front of Felrath's skull, because the man stopped moving as completely as if someone had turned him off. He stood there, the harness hung in his hand. One of his handlers, the one closest to the bay door, had already taken 2 quiet steps backward. Nobody pointed this out. "You have a behavioral anomaly," Felrath said finally, to no one in particular. "I have an inspection log to file," Essa said. Captain Duran had been standing in the bay doorway for the last 4 minutes. She was a compact woman in her 50s with 20 years of freight transit and no patience for paperwork that was going to generate more paperwork. She had watched Felrath's team arrive, watched the Felrath walk out of its cage, watched it sit down, and done the internal arithmetic that experienced captains do when the variables change mid-problem. She walked to Felrath. She held out her hand for his contract documentation. He gave it to her because she had that quality of presence that made people hand over things they were holding. She read through it for 90 seconds. "Behavioral noncompliance voids the transport guarantee on our end," she said. "The animal has self-selected a handler. We are not equipped to override self-selection. That is a specialty service. You will need to arrange specialist pickup from port." She handed the documentation back. "We will file an amended manifest." Felrath's jaw moved. "The contract has a force majeure clause covering non-compliant cargo behavior. Page 3. We both know it." He left. His team went with him. The portable crate sat in the middle of the bay like a piece of furniture no one had bought. Essa stood on the dock for a long time after. The Felrath had followed her off the ship with the unhurried certainty of something that had already decided, and it sat beside her in the open air of the station loading bay, real air, moving air, the smell of fuel and other animals and 100 different atmospheres mixing at the docking ring, and its ears swiveled to track each new sound, but it did not press itself low to the ground, did not flatten, just sat beside her. Essa's contract ended at disembarkation. She had no return ticket, 40 credits and 1 bag. She put her hand on the animal's head. It was warm, and the fur was coarser than she expected, and under her palm she could feel the vibration of something the Felrath was producing too low for her ears to resolve into a definite sound. A purr was the wrong word for it. A purr suggested something small. This was more like a continent settling. "I do not know what we do now," she said. The Felrath looked up at her. The pale gold eyes held her face with that same compass needle certainty, steady as the first time, as if she were the fixed point, and it had been navigating by her ever since she walked through the door on day one. It did not look like something that was worried about what came next. She looked out at the station. People moving, loaders running, the machinery of 40,000 daily transits grinding on without pausing for anyone's calculation. Somewhere past the docking ring, there was a wildlife conservation office she had looked up at 300 on day 6 when she could not sleep. There was a behavioral specialist on staff, whose name she had written on the inside of her wrist. She had not forgotten. "All right," Essa said, "come on." She walked. The Felrath rose and fell into step at her left side, its shoulder at her hip, 6 limbs covering the distance in that coordinated, soundless way, and the loaders and dock workers and transit staff who saw them coming parted without anyone saying a word about it. Not in fear exactly, just in the particular quiet courtesy of people who have understood that something in their world has shifted, and the adjustment is already underway. Nobody stopped them, nobody asked questions. The Felrath walked beside her out of the docking ring and into whatever came next, and it did not look back once.